I'm just going to have a think about this, and as I said at the start of the service, we're looking at, sort of in these early weeks after Easter, the areas of doubt, sometimes disbelief, difficulty, looking at that. Now, if those of you manage to keep the Luke one open, just sort of go back to that. Now, for those of you that were here last week, remember what we did? Thomas, yeah, that's it. And if you can, just nip back and find the readings that we had. So that was in the Gospel of John. Okay, so go back a bit. This is I always like this. You're having a good fiddle around through the Bible. So go to the Gospel of John, and then you need to go to John 20. So get to John chapter 20 again, towards the end of John. We aren't going to read this, I just want you to have it out there. So, John 20, and then it was starting at verse 19. And then it was 19 to 31. Okay, so John 20, 19 to 31. Okay then. So 19, there you go. Lovely. So yeah, we aren't going to read this, but just scan it through there, and if you've managed, there we go, this is the tricky bit, if you've managed to keep your finger in the Luke verses, look at that Lisa, model reader here, I want you to just see, what comparisons can you see? What things are the same, actually, between what we read last week. Well, we're doing a comparative study here. But what have we got there that's the same? Just as a broad thing. What does Jesus say? I'll give you a hand. There we go. Peace be with you. There we go. Who's there? Don't have to say specifically, but it's a group of disciples, isn't it? Yeah. Are they completely happy in themselves and are very strong in their faith? No. Thomas isn't. And what about this week? No, that's it. There's doubt in both rooms. Peter, Jesus' right-hand man, having a lot of difficulty. In fact, they all did. In fact, for those when we reflected last week and we talked about doubt in Thomas, in fact, there's so many similarities between these two, and in fact, these are Jesus very close to some. All of them have in doubt. Here.
You're talking about the Luke reading or the Acts?
Yeah, look, sorry. We're comparing Luke and John here. Yeah. So we're comparing the doubt in Thomas, which is the John 20, 19 to 31, and what we've just read with Luke. And to say that we've got this very similar thing. We've got some of Jesus' closest friends, disciples, gathered together. They're a bit unsure. Jesus comes amongst them. They're still doubtful. Jesus then does something. Yeah, he shows them something that gives them peace. He says, peace be with you, but he does something then to help them overcome their doubts and difficulties. Yeah. So yes, with doubt in Thomas, for Thomas it was about touching. This week it was them thinking they were seeing a ghost. Okay, and this was about Jesus then doing something really ordinary, of having some grilled fish. There we go. You wouldn't have thought so, but overcoming all their difficulties, it was just the ordinariness of having some fish is how Jesus allayed the difficulties. For those that weren't here last week, we looked at this whole area of doubt and difficulty, and that for anybody as they explore what they believe, their journey of faith, people have doubts at different stages, and it's very individual to you. It's not about one thing fits all, and these two examples are a good illustration that sometimes we have specific doubts and difficulties, and something particular has to happen for you to overcome that. the bottom line of what we said last week is that you just don't stay there. Don't ever stay sort of in agnosticism. Don't stay sat on the fence. Go forward. If you've got a problem, if you think, well, I can't believe any of this, that's fine. That's a starting point. And you can say, I'm interested. Let's go forward. If you've been a long time believing, then have a crisis. What I said last week is that everybody has permission to have doubts, say them, and we work through them together. That was the important thing from last week. Because again, we've got it next week, this week now, in these verses from Luke, just to say that a whole group of them there were doubting, were having trouble. But it was a way that they were prepared to say what their doubts were. Something happened, they moved on. Some of you may not know this, but the Gospel of Luke and the reading we had from Acts, Luke and Acts is like a 2-volume story. Okay? In some Bibles you will find them next to each other, and John in a different place. Luke and Acts were written by the same person, same time. Okay? And you can actually read Luke through to Acts as just one volume. And because we join it at the end of Luke there, they sort of go very quickly from being unsure, doubting, to when we get to that second reading from Acts, actually being really very full of wanting to tell people about Jesus and being very sure of their faith. It's a very short time period with that. So you can, like I say, you can read them too. They follow on with one another. But rather than Peter judging what's happened, this is those bits from Luke. He'd actually just did an example of sort of healing someone. People were amazed. And he was with people that had done bad things to them and bad things to Jesus, but he was just there, straight in there, giving them the right words for them to understand. There wouldn't be necessarily words we'd use today to tell people about our faith, but at that moment that's what was understood, and Peter was very confident in doing that. So just a little bit of biblical background there. And I think we just have to draw some bigger themes from what we've looked at this week and also last week, with sort of doubt, peace, or the ordinary, some of the photos that we've looked at today as well. And it does just come back to the fact that Jesus, in our reading today, just does something exceptionally ordinary. I know some people here who doesn't like grilled fish and quite a bit uncomfortable with that photo. Anyone here doesn't like grilled fish? Or if I serve that up, you go, I'm not too sure about that. Yeah, you'd have to take the head off, yes. But that's it was just something very, very ordinary, managed to overcome the disciples' difficulties at that time. And often our own difficulties in life, in faith, can actually be overcome with something quite simple. We don't have to think it's all part of the difficulty. And I think after that, we can actually go on and say to other people how you won't believe this, but this is where I was and this is what happened to me. It's not necessarily an eternal truth. It doesn't prove the existence of anything, but you can say how your journey of faith has been affected positively by something. Stephanie shared earlier that she happened to go to a Baptist church one day, heard I, the Lord of Sea and Sky, and it hit her like a love hour in the heart. And that's what you have. For the people there, it wouldn't have happened. They'd have just sang it and gone on. But that's it. It's watching out for those special moments. Or sometimes they do just hit you. And other times you do just have to look out for them. We often end up thinking too high up. We often end up being 30,000 feet above our lives. Can't see anything amazing going on because it all looks like one big landscape. We have to zoom in and spot the amazing. And then I think we can all move on. Jesus says in both of in John and in Luke, peace be with you. Okay? And we looked at this last week, saying that we can use it as a greeting. It's a greeting that not many people use these days, but I think it's not too old-fashioned or out of the way. That you can offer peace with someone. Peace be with you. I think it's something you can say to somebody, or words to similar. We can say that it's a nice thing to say. But it's also something that we read within the Bible that Jesus wants us to have deep peace. I think if you can actually have peace in your life, even if You're going through difficult patches physically, mentally, other people being horrible to you. If you've got peace, you can actually get on, actually. You've got the tools you need to go forward. And I think it is worth just exploring that for a moment, because one thing I haven't mentioned last week or this week is the tricky topic of forgiveness, actually, which is a big thing to do with being at peace. Okay? And whenever I mention forgiveness, you have to say a couple of things of what forgiveness isn't. Forgiveness isn't forgetting. It's never about that. It's happened. Forgive and forget's a load of rubbish. Of course you don't ever forget. It's not about saying it doesn't matter. Of course it matters. Because that hurt may stay forever. It's not about that at all. It's not about saying that the relationship with whatever's happened is the same afterwards. It's not. You've gone to a new place. The first steps of forgiveness are releasing the hate that's only hurting you. Releasing that hate. And then, with time, looking forward to reconciliation. Or at least getting to a point where you can reconcile with yourself and other people if you can't reconcile with the person or situation that's happened. So it's that tension of saying that, like I say, it's not forgetting. It's not forgetting the hurt. It's not saying it doesn't matter. It's not saying the relationship will ever go back to the way it was. It's about releasing the difficulty and then moving on. And one of the things I just wanted to share today is... Just move on. Great, brilliant resource. You know, if you're feeling in a bad place and you're thinking, I'm struggling with some forgiveness, actually, go to theforgivenessproject.com. Okay? It explores the possibility of forgiveness through real stories. Because the Forgiveness Project uses the real stories of victims and perpetrators to explore concepts of forgiveness and to encourage people to consider alternatives to resentment, retaliation and revenge. Tricky stuff, especially when you know someone's hurt you. On this website, there are stories on here. I know we started a bit late, but I will read this story, and I think this gets across the sort of story that's on there that gets you to think. Okay? So this is all genuine. Stephanie Casalti's mother was murdered in a convenience store robbery in New Orleans in 1980. Since then, Stephanie has become a wife, mother, professor, speaker and writer. Much of her work is centred on grief, healing and the possibility of forgiveness. She says this: "The impetus to learn about my mother's killer came from a virtual stranger. My husband and I were attending a meeting at a church when the head of a prison ministry stood up and spoke about his work at a local men's prison. I couldn't help but secretly characterise him as a holy roller as he paced back and forth, carrying his small worn Bible and speaking of the positive impact forgiveness could have on prisoners' lives. While I believed that forgiveness was generally a good thing, I had never considered forgiving the man who killed my mother. That brand of forgiveness was for extremists who went on Oprah. In fact, I strongly supported the death penalty, silently bitter that my mother's killer had only received a life sentence. After all, he put her through hell. He held her at gunpoint while she gave him all the money out the register, and then backing out of the store, fired a shot that hit her in the chest. She died within minutes in the arms of a co-worker. 2 days later, her killer was apprehended, driving a stolen car. He was sentenced to life without parole at Angola State Penitentiary in Louisiana. I was a freshman at college in Georgia, brought home for the funeral, half out my mind and deep in shock. Now, years later, the prison minister who tapped a deep vein, I began to wonder, could I ever forgive the man who had irreparably changed the course of my life? Having been spared the horror of the trial, I now wanted to know about this person who had killed my mother. So I researched the crime like it was a job assignment. I placed all my notes in a special folder, slowly developing a detailed mental profile of my mother's killer, Nathan Wolfe. All the while I continued to be confused about this question of forgiveness until one afternoon when I was casually leafing through the folder and a piece of paper fell out. It was the telephone number of the chaplain's office at Angola State Penitentiary. I decided to call the number. The father was answered by Father Damereux, who asked me how he could help. I told him that I was trying very hard to find a way to forgive the man who killed my mother. I also wanted to find out what happened that night and whether he feels any remorse, I said. Does it make a difference if he feels remorse? Asked Father Damereux. I really didn't know the answer to this. It would obviously be so much easier to forgive someone who showed remorse, but somehow I felt that shouldn't drive my decision. Father Damereux offered to serve as a mediator and suggested we could personally deliver a message from me. He asked me to tell him exactly what to say. I thought for a second, and then with a sudden burst of unexpected clarity I said, "Please tell him the daughter of the woman he killed in 1980 wishes to forgive him and would like to know if he has anything to say in return." Father Damereux said he'd need a week to get the message to Nathan and asked me to call him the following Friday. When I hung up the phone, I felt desperate, totally unsure what I'd done. What if he was released and came after my family? What if I wasn't really ready to forgive? The following Friday, I called Father Damereux. He described how after locating Nathan in Campe, a minimum security area, I'd gone to see him to deliver my message. As you might imagine, after 20 years, he was very taken aback. In fact, he was speechless, said Father Damereux. After a few minutes, he said he needed time to think about it. So I told him I'd be back in a few days. Father Damereux then explained how the following Wednesday he'd gone to camp to give his usual service when he saw Nathan sitting at the back of the room. After I finished, we spoke, he said. But before I tell you what he said, I need to tell you that Nathan is dying. I believe he has cancer. Of all the scenarios I'd imagined, it never crossed my mind that I'd be forgiven a dying man. Trembling, the tears streamed down my cheeks, and I realised for the first time since 1980, I felt at peace. I had nothing left to fear. Nathan wishes to convey how grateful he is for your forgiveness, continued Father Damereux. He's turning his life over to God and preparing for the end. He also asked me to tell you how deeply sorry he is for what he did. He said that he could never make an excuse for it, but that he was having a very bad time in his life, that he never intended to kill anybody, that he was out of his mind on drugs. He asked you to convey his deepest regrets to the rest of your family. I thanked Father Damereux and hung up. Sitting at my desk, tears of relief, sadness, gratitude and closure began to flow. Then, as if a window had been opened, a cold air blew in, and I felt my mother sitting next to me for the first time since she died. She was right next to me with her arms wrapped around me. 2 days after Christmas, a thin white envelope with blue lettering arrived from Angola State Penitentiary. It read, "Notice of release. Pursuant of Department regulation, this office is required to notify you of Nathan Wolf's release. He expired on December the 23rd, 2000. I stood, holding the letter to my chest, thinking about the word release. We both had been set free. So many years of grieving my mother. How strange now to grieve her killer. For the life he never had, the bad choices he made, and the love he probably never felt." Forgivenessproject.com there. It can take a long time to get to that deep peace, but there are ways to it. Okay. If you're struggling with anything, that's one of the reasons that we're here as a community, one of the reasons I'm here, and it's something we can start a journey towards. And I think I just want to sort of just bring this to a close now, whilst that was quite a deep and difficult bit, of actually coming back to those moments of awe and great. That second reading from Acts, you've got the people just responding in awe. Look for those awe moments. It will be in the ordinary. It may be something like I for the Lord of Sea and Sky, but treasure them. Use them as markers along your road and remember them. And it can be just something with yourself, out and about, a walk with the kids, grandkids. It might just be down the shop. Something may just happen. Just look for those little awe moments. And I'm just going to close off with, it's a quote by Mother Teresa. And I think it brings together quite a lot of what we've looked at the last couple of weeks. That, in fact, if we do these things, if we do go forward in forgiveness, in love, looking for peace, that it doesn't matter what happens because we're actually doing the right thing. People are often unreasonable and self-centred. Forgive them anyway. If you are kind, people may accuse you of ulterior motives. Be kind anyway. If you are honest, people may cheat you. Be honest anyway. If you find happiness, people may be jealous. Be happy anyway. The good you do today may be forgotten tomorrow. Do good anyway. Give the world the best you have, and it may never be enough. Give your best anyway. But you see, in the end, it's between you and God. It was never between you and them anyway. Let me just say a prayer. I'm just going to say this prayer, and I'm just going to say, just after each little bit of the prayer, I'm going to say, in doubts and fears, maybe hear your voice. Just invite you to say with me, peace be with you. So we pray for people living within earshot of gunfire, and for those stuck in the squalor of refugee camps. In our doubts and fears, may we hear your voice. Peace be with you. We pray for those Christians with whom we disagree, whose theology, attitudes or churchmanship differs from our own. In our doubts and fears, may we hear your voice. Peace be with you. We pray for communities where there is tension and people are afraid to walk the streets at night. In our doubts and fears, may we hear your voice. Peace be with you. We pray for families divided by conflict, whose members no longer speak to each other. In our doubts and fears, may we hear your voice. Peace be with you. We pray for people living with physical pain and those tormented by their inner demons. In our doubts and fears, may we hear your voice. Peace be with you. And finally, we pray for ourselves, our decisions and dilemmas. In our doubts and in our fears, may we hear your voice. Peace be with you. Just going to bring our time together with a song that just reminds us that God is with us and we can just be still in his presence.